Wolfless Omega spoke to the Alpha King's mother. Her accent left everyone shocked. They say a creature without a wolf has no soul, and a throat without a howl has no voice worth hearing. The Beta Guard sneered, his boot nudging the bucket of grey water that sloshed against Madison's frayed hem. Madison didn't flinch. In the Silver Moon Pack, she was less than a ghost. She was an absence, a mistake of nature. But as the heavy oak doors of the great hall groaned open, signalling the arrival of the royals, Madison swallowed a secret that burned hotter than the lye soap on her hands. They didn't know that when she opened her mouth, history itself would bleed out. The Grand Solstice Ball was a suffocating affair, a kaleidoscope of velvet, silk, and the heavy, musky scent of 500 shifting predators. For the elite of the werewolf world, it was a night of alliances and mating dances. For Madison, it was a night of invisibility. She moved through the periphery of the ballroom like a draught of cold air, her grey servant's dress blending seamlessly with the stone pillars. Her job was simple: clear the empty flutes of champagne, wipe away spills before they stained the imported rugs, and above all, never make eye contact. To be a Wolfless, an Omega born without the ability to shift or sense the mind link, was to be a pariah. To be a Wolfless in the service of the High Council was a death sentence waiting for a pretext. "Move, Stray," Lady Vane hissed, her crimson gown rustling aggressively as she brushed past Madison. Vane, a high-ranking female from the Southern Territories, smelled of cloying roses and ambition. She was the front-runner for the Alpha King's attention tonight, and she wore her arrogance like a second skin. Madison stepped back, bowing her head submissively, balancing a silver tray of empty crystal glasses with the grace of a tightrope walker. She didn't speak. She rarely did. In the 3 years since she had been found wandering the borders of the Silver Moon territory, ragged and memoryless, she had learned that silence was the only shield that didn't break. A sudden hush fell over the room, a tangible drop in atmospheric pressure that made the fine hairs on Madison's arms stand up. It wasn't just silence, it was submission. The Alpha King had arrived. Austin Blackwood walked through the archway, and the room seemed to tilt on its axis. He was a man carved from granite and midnight, tall enough to make the Beta Guards look like children. His tuxedo fit him with a dangerous precision, straining against shoulders that carried the weight of a kingdom. But it was his eyes, storm grey, restless, and utterly bored, that terrified Madison. He didn't look like a man looking for a queen. He looked like a predator looking for a reason to snap. Beside him walked the Dowager Queen, Ilara. She was a terrifying vision in silver lace, her posture rigid, her face a mask of critical disdain. She walked with a cane topped with a sapphire, but everyone knew she didn't need it. It was a weapon, not a crutch. Madison felt the urge to flee, a primal instinct that had nothing to do with a wolf she didn't possess, and everything to do with survival. She backed away toward the service corridor, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "The wine, girl," the head Omega whispered harshly, shoving a heavy decanter of vintage red into Madison's hands. "Take it to the high table, and do not spill a drop, or I'll have your hide." Madison's fingers trembled. The high table, the center of the storm. She took a breath, holding it in her chest like a prayer, and stepped out of the shadows. As she approached the dais where King Austin and Queen Ilara sat, the air grew thick with alpha power. It was a physical weight, pressing down on her shoulders. Most wolves would be trembling, their inner beasts cowering, but Madison felt only a strange, cold clarity. Without a wolf to cower, she was just a human girl walking into a lion's den. Austin was speaking to a visiting diplomat, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "The northern borders are secure. I have no interest in reopening trade routes that bring nothing but opium and insurrection." "But Your Majesty," the diplomat pressed, sweating. The traditions are dead men's baggage. Austin cut him off, his tone sharp enough to draw blood. He turned, his gaze sweeping over the room, dismissing the hundreds of hopeful debutantes. Then his eyes landed on Madison. It was a fraction of a second, a king looking at a servant. But Madison felt a jolt of electricity zip up her spine, so violent she nearly dropped the decanter. Austin frowned, his nostrils flaring slightly. He leaned forward, confusion flickering in his storm-grey eyes. He couldn't smell a wolf on her. To him, she must have been a void in the sensory tapestry of the room. Madison lowered her gaze instantly, pouring the wine into Queen Ilara's goblet with practiced precision. Her hand was steady, despite the king's burning stare. "Careful!" Ilara snapped, her voice like cracking ice. She watched the red liquid rise in the glass. "This vintage is older than your entire lineage, child." Madison finished the pour and stepped back, executing a perfect curtsy. She turned to leave, desperate to escape the orbit of the two most dangerous creatures on the continent. "Wait!" Austin's voice rang out. It wasn't a shout, but it stopped Madison dead in her tracks. The entire ballroom froze. The music died. Lady Vane, standing nearby, looked as though she had swallowed a lemon. "Turn around," Austin commanded. Madison turned slowly, keeping her eyes on the knot of his silk tie. "What is your name?" he asked. The question was simple, but the intensity behind it was baffling. Why would the Alpha King care about the name of a floor scrubber? "She is the Wolfless mute, my son," Ilara interjected dismissively, waving a hand. "She cleans the scullery. Waste no breath on her." Austin didn't look at his mother. He kept his eyes on Madison. "I asked for her name, and if she is mute, she can write it." Madison's lips parted. She wasn't mute. She was terrified. But the command of an Alpha King was not something one could ignore, even without a wolf. The compulsion pulled at her human mind, a demand for obedience. "Madison," she whispered. Her voice was rusty, unused, barely audible. "Speak up," Austin ordered, his voice dropping an octave. "I detest whispering." Madison took a breath. She looked up, meeting his gaze for the first time. And in that moment, the fear evaporated, replaced by a strange, defiant spark that she didn't know she possessed. "Madison," she said, louder this time. Austin's eyes narrowed. He opened his mouth to say something else, perhaps to ask why a girl with no scent had eyes that burned like molten gold. But a crash from the entryway shattered the moment. A messenger burst in, covered in snow and blood. "My king! The rogues! They've breached the west gate!" Chaos erupted. In the swirl of shifting bodies and screaming nobles, Madison vanished back into the shadows, her heart racing, not from the rogue attack, but from the way the king had looked at her, like he was trying to remember a song he had never heard. The rogue attack had been a distraction, a probing strike by a disorganized band of exiles. The royal guard had dispatched them within the hour, but the mood of the solstice ball had shifted from celebratory to tense. The king was agitated, his patience for the courting rituals effectively vaporized. The following morning, the atmosphere in the castle was brittle. Queen Ilara had summoned the ladies of the court to the solarium for high tea, a thinly veiled interrogation to see which of them possessed the fortitude to be a queen. Madison was assigned to the tea service, a punishment for having caught the king's eye the night before. The solarium was a magnificent glass-walled room, filled with exotic ferns and the morning sun. Lady Vane sat directly to Ilara's right, preening. "The attack was dreadful," Vane said, sipping her tea. "But it shows the weakness of the perimeter. If I were queen, I would double the sentries in the Blackwood." Ilara stared at her over the rim of her cup. "Military strategy, Lady Vane? Do you intend to lead the armies or birth heirs?" The table tittered nervously. Vane flushed. "I only meant that the king needs a partner who understands strength." "Strength is silent," Ilara murmured. She reached for a leather-bound book on the table beside her. It was ancient, the binding cracking, the pages yellowed. True strength is respecting the legacy of the blood. This book, she tapped the cover, contains the rite of the first moon. It is written in High Archaic, the dialect of the original royal lines, a language dead for 300 years. Ilara looked around the table, her gaze challenging. If any of you wish to sit on the throne beside my son, you must understand the history you will represent. Who among you can read the first passage? Silence descended on the table. The debutantes exchanged panicked glances. High Archaic was a scholar's language, obscure and incredibly difficult, known for its complex syntax and guttural, rolling phonetics that required a specific tongue shape to pronounce correctly. Lady Vane cleared her throat. Your Majesty, surely this is academic work. We are modern wolves. So you cannot read it, Ilara said flatly. Disappointing. Ilara opened the book. She squinted at the text, her brow furrowing. The ink is faded. Something about the blood of the moon. She trailed off, frustration evident. She pushed the book toward the center of the table. It is a blessing for the harvest, a simple prayer. Madison, hovering with a silver teapot, glanced down at the open page. The script was jagged, angular, looking more like claw marks than letters to the untrained eye. But to Madison, the letters didn't look like scratches. They looked like music. The words rearranged themselves in her mind, lifting off the page with a familiarity that made her head spin. She knew this text. She didn't know how, but she could hear the cadence of it in her head, a voice deep and resonant, a father's voice, a teacher's. It's not a prayer for harvest, Madison whispered. The room went deadly silent. Lady Vane whipped around. What did you say, servant? Ilara froze. She turned her head slowly, her eyes locking onto Madison. You spoke. Madison realized her mistake immediately. Her hands tightened on the teapot handle. Forgive me, Your Majesty. I spoke out of turn. You corrected me, Ilara said, her voice dangerously soft. You claim to know better than the Queen Mother? No, Your Majesty. I only... Read it, Ilara commanded. She pointed a manicured finger at the book. If you are so bold as to correct a queen, then prove your insolence isn't merely stupidity. Read the passage. She can't read, Your Majesty. Vane scoffed. She's a wolfless stray. Read it. Ilara slammed her hand on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Madison set the teapot down. Her heart was thundering, but a strange calm settled over her again. The script called to her. It demanded to be spoken. She looked at the page. The words were, Vala Morgulis Kahan, Dracos Naimus Ferin. Madison opened her mouth. When she spoke, the voice that emerged was not the rusty, timid whisper of the scullery maid. It was deep, resonant, and dripping with an elegance that made the modern dialect sound like the barking of dogs. The vowels were rounded and long, the consonants hitting the back of her throat with a soft, purring click, a linguistic feature that had vanished centuries ago. It says, Madison recited, the strange aristocratic accent rolling off her tongue like liquid gold. The blood of the moon is not given, it is taken. The dragon eats the sun so the wolf may hunt in the shadow. She paused, the accent hanging in the air, thick and regal. It is not a harvest prayer, Your Majesty. It is a declaration of war, a warning from the era of the 3 crowns. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy, suffocating, and total. Lady Vane's mouth hung open. The other debutantes looked terrified. But it was Queen Ilara's reaction that was the most shocking. The Queen Mother's face drained of all color. She dropped her cane. Her hands shook as she gripped the edge of the table. She stared at Madison, not with anger, but with a look of recognition and utter horror. That accent, Ilara whispered, her voice trembling. No one has spoken the high tongue with that inflection since the fall of the House of Valois. The double doors to the solarium burst open. King Austin strode in, flanked by 2 guards. "Mother, I heard you shouting. What is the—" He stopped. He looked at the frozen table. He looked at his mother, pale and shaking, and then he looked at Madison, who stood tall, the echo of the dead language still vibrating in the air around her. "What happened?" Austin demanded, sensing the shift in the room. "She—" Elara pointed a shaking finger at Madison. "She speaks the king's English, the first king's English." Austin turned his gaze to Madison. The boredom was gone. In its place was a sharp, predatory intensity. "Who are you?" Madison curtsied, but this time the motion felt less like servitude and more like muscle memory of a court she couldn't remember. "I am no one, Your Majesty. Just Madison." "No one learns that accent in a scullery," Austin said, stepping closer. He invaded her personal space, his scent of rain and cedar wrapping around her. "Speak again." "Sire." "Speak," he growled, low in his throat. "Say my name." Madison looked up into his storm-grey eyes. The connection flared again, hotter this time. "King Austin Blackwood." The way she said it, Austin, with a soft, elongated vowel and a crisp, precise ending, made his name sound like a spell. Austin's pupils blew wide. "Clear the room." "Your Majesty!" Vane squeaked. "Everyone out!" Austin roared, his alpha command slamming into the walls. The solarium emptied in a flurry of silk and terrified scurrying. Within seconds, only Austin, Elara, and Madison remained. The morning sun filtered through the glass, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, but the temperature in the room had plummeted. Elara had collapsed back into her chair, pressing a handkerchief to her lips. She watched Madison with the wary eyes of a badger cornered by a viper. Austin circled Madison slowly. He moved like a panther, silent and lethal. Madison stood her ground, clasping her hands in front of her apron. She focused on breathing, on keeping the sudden, throbbing headache at bay. The reading of the text had unlocked something behind her eyes, a pressure building against a dam. "Where did you come from?" Austin asked, stopping directly in front of her. He was close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his irises. "I was found 3 years ago, sire, by the border patrol near the Whispering Woods. I had no memory, no name. The pack took me in as charity." "Charity?" Austin scoffed. "They made you a servant because you have no wolf." "Yes, but you aren't human," Austin murmured, leaning down. He took a deep breath near her neck, inhaling deeply. Madison shivered, her pulse jumping in her throat. "You smell like nothing. Not like a human. Humans smell of dust and sweat. You smell like empty air. Like snow before it falls." He reached out, his large hand cupping her chin, forcing her to look up. His skin was rough, calloused from sword training, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. "And that accent, that is not something you mimic. That is muscle memory. That is how your tongue was formed to move." "It was the book, sire," Madison said breathlessly. "The letters, they just made sense." "The House of Valois was slaughtered 50 years ago," Elara spoke up, her voice regaining some of its steel. "They were the keepers of the old ways. Their children were trained in the high tongue from birth to channel magic, not shifting. They were considered dangerous, too powerful." Elara stood up, leaning heavily on her cane. "If she is of that line, Austin, she is a threat. The council ordered the extermination of the Valois for a reason. They were said to be able to command alphas without using a wolf voice." Austin didn't look at his mother. His thumb brushed Madison's lower lip, tracing the curve. The contact sent a jolt through him that made his wolf pace restlessly in his mind. "Mate?" the beast questioned. "No scent." "But mine." She is a girl with a scrub brush, Mother, Austin said quietly. Not a sorceress. She is an anomaly, Ilara snapped. We cannot have anomalies in the castle. Cast her out. Or better yet, send her to the dungeons until we find out who taught her that forbidden tongue. Madison flinched. The dungeons. She had heard stories of the cells beneath the Silver Moon castle, damp, dark, and full of things that scurried. No, Austin said. The word was final. He released Madison's chin and stepped back. She stays, and she is no longer a scullery maid. Austin, Ilara gasped. You cannot be serious. I need a translator, Austin lied smoothly, though his eyes never left Madison's face. The northern negotiations are stalling, because we rely on modern interpreters who butcher the nuance of the old treatise. If she can read High Archaic as easily as she breathes, she is the most valuable asset in this kingdom. You intend to bring a wolfless savage into the war room? Ilara looked like she might have a stroke. I intend to keep her where I can see her, Austin corrected. He looked at Madison. From this moment, you are under my direct protection. You will move your things to the east wing. You will be clothed properly, and you will be ready to work by dawn. Madison felt the room spin. The east wing was the royal quarter. Sire, I don't know if I can. Do you know the penalty for speaking the high tongue if you are not of royal blood? Austin asked, his voice low. Madison shook her head. Death, Austin said, by public execution. I just gave you a job, Madison. The alternative is the block. He wasn't saving her out of kindness, she realized. He was capturing her. He was intrigued, aroused, and suspicious all at once. He was keeping the puzzle box close so he could figure out how to open it. I understand, Your Majesty, Madison whispered. Good. Austin turned to his mother. Arrange quarters for her, near mine. Near yours? Ilara's eyes narrowed. This is dangerous, Austin. She has no wolf. If she is an assassin, if she tries to kill me with a teapot, I think I can handle it, Austin said dryly. He turned to leave, but paused at the door. He looked back at Madison, who was still trembling slightly in the center of the room. And Madison? Yes, sire? Don't hide that voice again, he said, a strange darkness passing over his face. It's the first real thing I've heard in this castle in 20 years. He swept out of the room, leaving Madison alone with a fuming Queen Mother and a destiny that had just shifted from invisible to blindingly bright. As Madison watched the empty doorway, a sharp pain spiked in her temples. A flash of memory assaulted her. Fire, snow, and a woman with silver hair screaming in that same beautiful high archaic accent. Run, little star. Run until you forget who you are. Madison touched her throat. She had forgotten. But the king had just commanded her to remember. And that might be the most dangerous thing of all. The east wing of the royal palace did not smell like lye soap and damp stone. It smelled of beeswax, crushed lavender, and the terrifying metallic tang of absolute power. Madison stood in the center of her new quarters, a suite of rooms larger than the entire servants' dormitory she had slept in for 3 years. The bed was a monstrosity of carved mahogany and down feathers draped in midnight blue silk. There was a fireplace roaring with birch logs, casting long, dancing shadows against walls lined with tapestries depicting the great hunts of the Blackwood lineage. Stand still, the seamstress muttered, her mouth full of pins. Madison flinched as the woman cinched the corset tighter. This wasn't a servant's uniform. It was a gown of charcoal velvet, high-collared and long-sleeved, tailored to an inch of its life. It was severe, elegant, and suffocating. It was a uniform of a different kind, the livery of the king's personal property. His Majesty requested no jewels, the seamstress said, stepping back to admire her work with a critical, cold eye. He said you are not to be decorated. You are to be distinct. Madison looked at herself in the tall, gilded mirror. The girl staring back was a stranger. The grime of the scullery was gone, scrubbed away in a bath so hot it had turned her skin pink. Her hair, usually hidden under a rough kerchief, fell in loose, honey-coloured waves down her back. But it was her eyes that held her attention. Without the dirt and the hunch of submission, they looked too bright, too gold. They looked like the eyes of someone who could read dead languages and terrify queen mothers. A sharp knock on the door made her jump. "Enter," she whispered, then cleared her throat, remembering the king's command. "Enter." A royal guard, a beta with a face like a slab of concrete, opened the door. "The king awaits you in the map room. Immediately." Madison followed him, her new velvet skirts swishing softly against the marble floors. They walked past the guards, past the curious, whispering nobles who fell silent as she approached, their eyes tracking her with a mix of hostility and hunger. She wasn't just the wolfless mute anymore. She was the anomaly the king had plucked from the ashes. The map room was a cavernous space, dominated by a massive circular table littered with charts, compasses, and half-empty goblets of wine. King Austin stood by the window, staring out at the snow-covered training grounds. He was still in his formal wear from the previous day, his collar unbuttoned, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. He didn't turn when she entered. "Leave us," he commanded the guard. The door clicked shut. The silence stretched, heavy and taut. "Come here," Austin said, his voice rough with exhaustion. Madison approached the table. She saw what he was looking at now. Spread across the surface wasn't a map, but a series of scraps, parchment, torn fabric, and even a piece of bark, all scrawled with the jagged, claw-like script of High Archaic. "These were found on the bodies of the rogues who attacked the West Gate," Austin said, finally turning to face her. His eyes were bloodshot, the storm-grey iris swirling with agitation. "My scholars say it's gibberish. Madness scrawled by feral wolves." He placed a hand on the table, leaning in close to her. "Tell me it's gibberish, Madison. Tell me I don't have a coordinated insurrection on my doorstep." Madison looked down at the scraps. The headache pushed behind her eyes again. A familiar pressure. The letters didn't swim. They locked into place. She picked up the piece of bark. Her fingers traced the carvings. "It's not gibberish," she said softly. Her voice dropped into that strange, resonant timbre, the accent of the old world slipping over her tongue like silk. "It's a rallying cry." Austin went still. "Read it." "This one," she pointed to the bark, "says, 'The star has fallen into the mud. We ride to retrieve the light before the shadow swallows it.'" She moved to the torn fabric. "And this is a location. Beneath the roots of the iron oak, where the brothers bled." Austin swore, a harsh sound that made Madison flinch. "The iron oak, that's the site of the Treaty of Brothers. It's deep in the neutral territory." He looked at her, his gaze intense, stripping her defenses layer by layer. "Who is the star, Madison?" Madison shook her head, her heart thumping against the velvet bodice. "I don't know, sire, I swear." "You have no wolf," Austin murmured, stepping around the table until he was standing directly behind her. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the wood smoke and rain scent that was uniquely his. "You have no memory. And yet, you speak the language of the enemy my ancestors slaughtered." He leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. Madison's breath hitched. "Are you the star, Madison?" he whispered. "Did they come for the castle, or did they come for you?" "I am nobody," she gasped, her hands gripping the edge of the table to keep her knees from buckling. The proximity of an alpha of his power was overwhelming. It triggered a biological imperative to submit, but her mind, her strange, human mind, wanted to lean back into him. "You are not nobody," Austin said, his hand sliding up her arm, his thumb pressing into the soft skin of her inner wrist, feeling her racing pulse. "You are the most dangerous puzzle in my kingdom, and I am going to solve you." He stepped away abruptly, the loss of his warmth leaving her shivering. "You will stay here," he commanded, moving back to the window. "You will translate every scrap of paper in this room. If you find a name, a date, or a threat, you tell me." "And Madison?" She looked up. "Do not leave this room," he warned. "There are wolves in this castle who would tear your throat out just to see if you bleed red or blue. You belong to me now. That is the only reason you are still breathing." It was 3 a.m. when the door opened again. Madison hadn't moved. She sat at the massive table, surrounded by stacks of translated notes. Her hand cramped, ink staining her fingers, but she couldn't stop. The text was hypnotic. It told a story of a lost empire, of a bloodline that didn't just shift into wolves, but commanded the elements. It was a history the victors had erased. Austin walked in, looking worse than he had earlier. His shirt was gone, revealing a torso scarred by battle and marked with the intricate tattoos of the royal line. He held a bottle of whiskey in one hand. He stopped when he saw her. "You're still here?" "You told me not to leave," Madison said, her voice raspy. Austin huffed a laugh, a dry, humorless sound. He walked over, pulling out the heavy oak chair beside her and collapsing into it. He took a long pull from the bottle, then offered it to her. Madison hesitated, then took it. She took a small sip, the amber liquid burning a path down her throat. "Why are you awake?" she asked, emboldened by the whiskey and the late hour. Austin leaned his head back, closing his eyes. "The noise," he muttered. 5,000 wolves in this city. I can hear them. Their dreams, their fears, their petty squabbles. It's a constant hum in the back of my skull, the curse of the Alpha King. We are linked to everyone." He opened one eye, looking at her sideways. "Everyone but you." Madison set the bottle down. "Is that why you keep me close? Because I'm a blind spot?" "You're a silencer," Austin corrected. He shifted his chair closer, the wood scraping against the stone floor. He reached out, taking her ink-stained hand in his. The moment their skin touched, Austin let out a long, shuddering breath. The tension in his shoulders dropped, the lines of pain around his eyes smoothed out. "Silence," he whispered, looking at her hand with wonder. "When I touch you, the voices stop. It's like stepping into a sanctuary." Madison looked at their joined hands. His was massive, calloused, dangerous. Hers was small, pale, stained with the words of his enemies. "I don't understand," she said softly. "I'm wolfless. I'm broken." "Maybe," Austin said, his thumb tracing the veins in the back of her hand. "Or maybe you're the only whole thing here." He turned his body fully toward her. The air in the room shifted, thickening with a different kind of tension. It wasn't the threat of violence this time. It was the heavy, magnetic pull of desire. "You possess a power you don't understand, Madison," Austin said, low, his voice rumbling in his chest. "My mother is terrified of you. The council wants you dead, and I—" He leaned in, his face inches from hers. She could see the gold flecks in his grey eyes, the dilation of his pupils. "I just want to keep touching you," he finished. Madison's heart hammered a frantic rhythm. She should pull away. He was the king. She was a servant, a mystery, a potential threat. But she didn't move. She leaned in, drawn by a gravity she couldn't name. "Austin," she breathed. It was the first time she had used his name without a title. He didn't correct her. His gaze dropped to her lips. He tilted his head, closing the distance. Madison's eyes fluttered shut. She felt his breath on her skin, hot and scented with whiskey. Bam! The door to the map room flew open. Austin snarled, a feral, guttural sound, and spun around, positioning his body between Madison and the intruder in a blur of motion. It was General Thorn, the head of the Royal Guard. He looked pale. "Forgive me, sire," Thorn gasped, averting his eyes from the king's half-naked form and the girl behind him. "But the beacon has been lit." Austin went rigid. The softness of the previous moment vanished, replaced by the cold armor of the king. "Which beacon?" Austin demanded. "The obsidian tower," Thorn said grimly. "Someone has broken into the vault of artifacts." Austin turned to Madison. His face was hard, unreadable. "Stay here. Lock the door. Open it for no one but me." "Austin." "Do as I say," he roared, the alpha command slamming into her chest. He grabbed his sword belt from the table and stormed out, leaving Madison alone in the sudden, ringing silence. The taste of whiskey and almost kisses still lingering on her lips. The next morning, the palace was in lockdown. Rumors flew through the corridors like frightened birds. Something had been stolen from the vault, something ancient and dangerous. Madison was escorted by 4 guards to the Great Hall. It was not a request. It was a summons. The hall was packed. The Council of Elders sat in a semicircle on the dais. Queen Elara sat in the center, looking like a statue made of ice and vengeance. Lady Vane stood beside her, looking triumphant. And there, in the middle of the room, stood Austin. He looked tired, his jaw set in a line of grim fury. When Madison entered, the room went silent. She walked down the long carpet, her velvet dress heavy around her legs. She felt the weight of hundreds of eyes, hating, judging, fearing. "Step forward, girl." Elder Kyle, a wizened wolf with a scar running down his face, barked. Madison stopped at the base of the dais. She looked at Austin. He gave a nearly imperceptible nod. "Courage. We have found the thief," Lady Vane announced, her voice ringing clear and shrill, or rather, the accomplice. Vane stepped forward, holding a velvet cloth. She whipped it away to reveal a dagger. It was made of black glass, the hilt carved into the shape of a twisting dragon. "This blade was found in the vault," Vane said. "It is a ceremonial dagger of the House of Valois. It reacts only to the blood of the old lines." Vane turned her predatory smile on Madison. "The guards found this in the East Wing, hidden in the mattress of the king's new favorite." A gasp rippled through the crowd. "That is a lie," Madison said, her voice shaking but clear. "I have never seen that dagger." "Then you won't mind touching it," Elara said smoothly. "If you are truly a wolfless nobody, the blade will remain dormant. But if you are a Valois spy, the blade will sing." "This is a farce," Austin growled, stepping forward. "She has been in my study all night. She could not have entered the vault." "Unless she used the shadow walk," Elder Kale countered. "A Valois talent. We must know what she is, my king, for the safety of the pack." Austin's hands clenched into fists. He looked at Madison. He couldn't stop this without looking like he was protecting a traitor. He needed her to pass the test. "Do it, Madison," Austin said, his voice tight. "Prove them wrong." Madison stared at the black dagger. She felt a pull, a magnetic hum in her bones, the same feeling she got from the book. The object wanted her. She reached out. Her hand trembled, her fingers brushed the obsidian hilt. For a second, nothing happened. Vane's smile faltered. Then, a sound like a tolling bell resonated through the hall, not from the dagger, but from Madison. The blade didn't just glow, it erupted. A beam of violet light shot upward, hitting the vaulted ceiling. The light swirled, forming a shape. Not a wolf, not a dragon, but a crown of 3 interlocking stars. The force of the magic threw Vane backward. She landed in a heap of crimson silk. Madison gasped, trying to let go, but the dagger was stuck to her hand. The power rushed into her, filling the empty spaces where a wolf should have been. It wasn't a beast. It was pure, raw energy. "She is the heir!" Elara screamed, standing up and pointing a shaking finger. "Kill her! Kill the Witch Queen!" The guards drew their swords. The sound of steel on leather filled the room. Madison stood frozen, the violet light bathing her in a terrifying, ethereal glow. She looked at Austin. He was looking at her with wide eyes, not with fear, but with a dawn of realization. "Hold!" Austin roared, drawing his own sword. He stepped in front of Madison, facing his own council, his own mother. "She is an enemy of the state," Kyle shouted. "She is Valois. She must die." "She is my mate," Austin bellowed. The declaration hit the room like a physical blow. The silence was absolute. Madison stared at his back. Mate? But he couldn't smell her. He had no bond. He was lying to save her. "She is my mate," Austin repeated, his voice lower, deadlier. "And anyone who raises a blade against her declares war on the king." He turned his head slightly, locking eyes with Madison over his shoulder. "Run," he commanded softly, so only she could hear. "What?" "I can't hold them all," Austin said, sweat beading on his forehead, as he held the alpha dominance over the room, fighting the will of the council. "Run to the Iron Oak. Go!" "I won't leave you," Madison whispered. "Go!" Austin roared. He lunged forward, parrying a strike from a guard who had broken the command. Chaos erupted. Madison looked at the man fighting for her, the man who found silence in her touch. Then she looked at the dagger in her hand, pulsing with the power of a dead empire. She turned and ran. She ran toward the service corridors, toward the dark, toward the truth of who she was. And as she fled, she heard the howl of the Alpha King, a sound of rage and heartbreak that shattered the stained glass windows of the great hall. The snow was not cold. It was burning. Madison ran until her lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass, her velvet dress torn on the briars of the Blackwood forest. The black glass dagger was still fused to her hand, pulsing with a violet rhythm that matched her frantic heartbeat. She didn't know where she was going, only that the command run had been the last thing Austin said to her. But as the adrenaline faded, replaced by the bone-deep chill of the winter night, a new instinct took over. The dagger wasn't just a weapon. It was a compass. It pulled her northward, toward the neutral territories, toward the ancient, gnarled silhouette of the Iron Oak. She collapsed at the base of the massive tree, its roots thick as castle walls. "I am nobody," she whispered to the darkness, shivering violently. "I am just a girl with a scrub brush." "You are a liar," a voice answered from the shadows. Madison scrambled back, raising the dagger. A figure emerged from the hollow of the tree. It was a woman, cloaked in grey furs, her face marked with the same jagged tattoos that Austin bore, but hers were faded, scarred over. "Peace, child," the woman said, raising her hands. "We saw the light from the palace. We heard the bell toll." "Who are you?" Madison asked, her voice trembling. "We are the silenced," the woman said. Behind her, more figures emerged from the snow, men and women, some old, some young. None of them smelled like wolves. They smelled like ozone, like old paper, like the storm before it breaks. "We are the remnants of the House of Valois, and we have been waiting for 50 years for the dagger to wake up." The woman stepped into the moonlight. Her eyes were a shocking, familiar gold. "My name is Seraphina," she said softly. "I was your mother's handmaiden, and you, little star, look exactly like her before the fire took the West Wing." Madison felt the world tilt. "My mother?" "Queen Isadora of Valois," Seraphina confirmed. "She didn't die in the coup. She hid. She bound your wolf with a spell of silence to hide your scent from the hunters. That is why you are wolfless. Your beast isn't missing, Madison. It is sleeping beneath a mountain of magic, waiting for the right voice to wake it." Seraphina reached out and touched the dagger. The violet light flared, warm and welcoming. "The king didn't cast you out," Serafina murmured, looking at the palace in the distance. "He sent you to your army." "Army?" Madison looked at the ragged group of 30 people. "This is an army?" "We do not fight with claws," Serafina said, a dangerous smile touching her lips. "The Valois fight with the voice. The high tongue is not just a language, it is the source code of our world. You proved that when you spoke to the Alpha King's mother. You didn't just annoy her. You shook the foundations of her authority." "Austin," Madison gasped, the realization hitting her. "He's alone. He's fighting them alone." "He is the Alpha King," Serafina said. "He is strong. But against the Council and the Queen Mother, he will break. Unless what? "Unless the Queen returns," Serafina said. She knelt in the snow. One by one, the others followed suit. "The spell binding your wolf can be broken, but it requires a sacrifice of safety. If you wake the dragon wolf within you, the Council will sense it instantly. There will be no hiding." Madison looked at the dagger, then back at the distant castle, where a plume of black smoke was beginning to rise. She remembered the way Austin had looked at her, not as a servant, not as a puzzle, but as the only quiet thing in his loud world. "I am done hiding," Madison said, her voice dropping into the deep, resonant cadence of the high archaic. The accent was thicker now, more powerful. "Teach me how to break the seal." The dungeon of the Silver Moon Palace was a place where hope went to die. Austin hung from chains of silver-infused steel, his torso bare and bloody. Silver burned werewolves. It prevented them from shifting, leaving them in a state of constant, searing agony. He hadn't made a sound in 12 hours. Stubborn, Queen Ilara sighed, pacing in front of him. She looked impeccable, untouched by the chaos she had orchestrated. "Just sign the annulment, Austin. Declare the girl a witch who beguiled you. We execute her by proxy, burn her things, and you marry Lady Vane. The kingdom stabilizes." Austin lifted his head. His eyes were dim, the storm grey dulled by pain, but his sneer was intact. "I would rather marry a corpse than Vane." Ilara stopped pacing. She struck him across the face with her cane. The sapphire topper cut his cheek. "You are a fool," she hissed. "I did everything for this family. I purged the Valois to keep us pure. Their magic is chaos, Austin. It is unnatural. That girl. She is a disease." "She is the cure," Austin wheezed, blood coating his teeth. "Can't you hear it, Mother? The silence. Even now, she's out there. And she's quieting the world." "She is dead in the snow by now," Ilara scoffed. "My trackers are the best." "Your trackers are sheep," Austin growled. The heavy iron door of the dungeon groaned. A guard stumbled in, looking terrified. "Your Majesty," he stammered. "You need to come to the courtyard. The wolves, they are kneeling." "Kneeling," Ilara frowned. "To whom?" "To the wind, Majesty. The wind is singing." Ilara went pale. She turned on her heel and marched out, leaving the door unlocked in her haste. Austin pulled at his chains. "Singing?" He closed his eyes and reached out with his mind, past the pain, past the silver burn, and he heard it. It wasn't a song. It was a chant, low, rhythmic, and vibrating with power. It was the high tongue. "Vala Morgulis Kahan." The chains around his wrists began to vibrate. The silver, usually so cold and hard, started to heat up. Austin laughed, a broken, raspy sound. She came back. With a roar of effort, he pulled. The heated metal groaned. The chant grew louder in his head, feeding him strength, pouring into his veins like liquid fire. Crack! The chain on his right wrist snapped. Then the left. Austin fell to the stone floor, gasping. He stood up, shaking the numbness from his limbs. His wolf was close to the surface, snarling for vengeance. He kicked the dungeon door open and ran toward the stairs. He didn't need a weapon. He was the weapon. And his mate was calling him home. The courtyard was a battlefield of silence. Hundreds of royal guards stood frozen, their swords lowered, their eyes wide with confusion. In the center of the yard stood Madison. She was no longer the girl in the velvet dress. She wore armor, ancient, blackened steel plates over tattered silk that she had found in the iron oak. Her hair whipped around her face like a halo of gold. In her hand, the black dagger had transformed, lengthening into a sword of pure violet light. Behind her stood the 30 remnants, chanting in unison. Their voices created a physical barrier, a dome of pressure that kept the guards at bay. "Stop this madness!" Elara shrieked from the balcony overlooking the yard. "Archers, loose!" The archers on the wall raised their bows. They released a volley of arrows. Madison didn't flinch. She looked up, her eyes glowing with a terrifying light. She opened her mouth and spoke a single word in the high tongue. "Etheris!" The air above her rippled. The arrows hit the invisible barrier and shattered into dust, raining down like harmless glitter. The courtyard gasped. "Sorcery!" Lady Vane screamed from beside the Queen. "She is a monster!" "I am the balance!" Madison's voice boomed, amplified by magic so that it reached every corner of the city. "For 50 years you have ruled by fear, crushing the spirit of the pack. You called magic a curse because you could not control it. But the wolf and the dragon were never meant to be enemies." She pointed the violet sword at the balcony. "Elara Blackwood, your reign ends now." "Kill her!" Elara screamed, foaming at the mouth. "I command you, kill the witch!" The guards hesitated. The Alpha Command was strong, but the fear of the godlike figure in the courtyard was stronger. Suddenly, a massive shape exploded from the castle doors. A wolf, a midnight black wolf, larger than any other, with storm-grey eyes and scars rippling across its flank. "The king!" someone shouted. Austen's wolf charged. But he didn't charge at Madison. He charged at the balcony. He leaped, a feat of impossible strength, his claws digging into the stone. He scrambled up the wall, roaring a challenge that shook the teeth of everyone present. Elara stumbled back, terror finally piercing her arrogance. "Austen! I am your mother!" Austen shifted in midair, landing on the balcony in human form, naked, bloody, and terrifying. He stood between his mother and Madison. "You are no mother," Austen said, his voice a low rumble. "A mother protects, you only devour." He looked down at the courtyard, at Madison. The connection between them snapped into place, hard, fast, and permanent. He could feel her soul now. It was vast, ancient, and beautifully silent. "My king," Madison said, bowing her head slightly. The violet sword dimmed, but didn't vanish. Austen looked at the council, at the guards, at the city watching from the windows. "The House of Valois is under my protection," Austen declared, his voice carrying the full weight of the Alpha Command. "Madison is my mate. She is your queen. Anyone who defies this, defies the moon itself." Elara lunged for him, a hidden dagger in her hand. "I will not let you ruin us." But before she could strike, Madison moved. She didn't run. She didn't throw her sword. She simply spoke. "Sister." Elara froze mid-strike. Her body went rigid, paralyzed by the command. The dagger clattered to the stone floor. Madison walked through the parted crowd of guards. She climbed the stairs to the balcony, her steps heavy and deliberate. She stopped in front of the frozen Queen Mother. "You took my memory," Madison whispered, her accent thick with the sorrow of a lost childhood. "You took my voice. You tried to take my life. But you forgot the first rule of the old ways." Madison leaned in, her golden eyes boring into Elara's terrified ones. "Energy cannot be destroyed," Madison said. "It only changes form. You tried to bury me, Elara, but you only planted a seed." Madison turned to Austen. He was watching her with a look of pure, unadulterated awe. "Are you with me?" she asked him, extending her hand. Austen took it. He pulled her close, kissing her forehead, sealing the bond in front of the entire kingdom. The noise in his head, the constant, maddening hum of the pack, finally, completely stopped. In her arms there was only peace. "Always," he whispered. My silent queen. The coronation of Madison and Austin was not held in the Great Hall, but under the open sky, beneath the branches of the iron oak. It was a scandal to the traditionalists, but a miracle to the people. The Wolfless were no longer outcasts. They were tested for the spark of Valois, and schools were built to teach the high tongue alongside the art of the shift. Madison never fully recovered the memories of her first 5 years, but she made new ones. She ruled not with fear, but with a voice that could calm storms and break chains. And every night when the castle slept, the Alpha King would hold his queen, listening to the beautiful, perfect silence of a love that had defied history. They proved that destiny isn't written in the stars. It's spoken by those brave enough to find their own voice. If you enjoyed this story of forbidden magic and fated mates, please like, share, and subscribe for more romances that break the rules.